Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned?
Okay, well, thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm glad you didn't do a long introduction, Tom, because it cuts into my time. Is this podium in the way? We can put this on the floor. Are you sure? Steve, you can see? Okay. Well, C. Emlen Urban, what do all these buildings have in common? Other than the fact that they were designed by Lancaster's architect, C. Emlen Urban. What do they have in common? They're all in Lancaster. Very good, Tom. Actually, all those buildings, there's 28 buildings on that list. They're all within 1,200 feet of the monument in Center City. 1,200 feet. That is a short walk. Just put a compass there, spin it around, and you can visit 28 of those historic buildings. So we're going to talk about C. Emlen Urban, the architect, and a fellow Rotarian. Did you know that he was a Rotarian? There you go. So what we're going to do this afternoon, and I have until 2:15. The way this is going to work, quite honestly, C. Emlen Urban in his career worked for 51 years designing and constructing buildings in 3 counties. There is no way we're going to get through that in a meaningful way. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about a few of the buildings that he's done chronologically. So we're going to talk about his life, and quite honestly, architectural history in college was my worst subject. I hated it. It was not taught to be fun. All it was memorization of dates and people and buildings, but no stories behind the architects that built the buildings or designed them. So I'm as interested in the person as I am the building. So it's going to be a blend and a marriage of those two. So I'm going to tell you the story behind C. Emlen Urban, but if we get to 1898 by 1:15, it'll be a miracle. So don't look for a miracle. The way it's going to work is we'll stop at 1:15, and then you have to invite me back for the rest of the story. So let's start. In that body of work, in his 51 years of practicing architecture, C. Emlen Urban mastered 18 styles of architecture. So he was far from being a cookie-cutter architect. He was able to understand the differences, the details, the innuendos in these 18 different styles of architecture in our city. So he was born in February of 1863 in Conestoga Township. So boom, my light goes off as the first question of interest to me. We'll talk about that coming up. His parents were Amos and Barbara. His father, Amos, was one of 6 boys. All 6 boys fought in the Civil War, and all survived. Now, the interesting thing you'll note is he was born in 1863, which was also the year of the Battle of Gettysburg, right? So he wasn't always at war. Think about that. He also had three siblings, 3 sisters and a brother. And his brother actually worked in his architectural practice with him. And his spouse was Jenny Olivia. Now, this is the interesting part. This really got my attention. This body of work that this gentleman was able to generate was done with a high school education. That's it. He graduated from high school in 1880 with a high school degree. So this whole thing with Conestoga piqued my interest. So I dug out a census map from 1860, and you can see it says Conestoga, but when you look carefully, you can see there's a number of urban families in Conestoga. You have Joseph Urban, Jacob Urban, but the fact is, through the census books, he was not born in any of those houses. He was born in the house of Amos Benedict, right across the street from an uncle. So he was born in a house there. So taking that 1860 map, then dropping it into Google Earth, I wanted to see if that house still existed. I wanted to see the homestead of C. Emlen Urban. The C, by the way, is for Cassius And there's a Google Earth. I just dropped it in there. It aligns perfectly with the 1860 census map, but one difference is his house is gone. So I hopped in the car, take a ride down to Conestoga to see if I could actually find the location, and sure enough, it is a blank piece of ground. When you look at this slide, however, do you see some creases in the earth? Do you see there's like an embankment? I'll just put do you see that? That's the remnant of the foundation of the house. And I talked to a neighbor who said there was in fact a house there. So just driving down the street a piece, I was able to see what his house probably looked like. On the same side of the road, there is this kind, we call it a Swiss house, where it's banked or driven into the ground on a very steep slope. So we know he was born along this road in the Amos Benedict house. Now, it wasn't too long after he was born that his family, Amos and his mother, moved to Lancaster City. And around the time of his high school education, they were living in this house, which is still there at 444 South Queen Street. Now, the story has it that C. Emlen had a hand in the design of these, although these are what we call pattern book houses. These came out of a book, or like a Sears catalog, and that was very common in the 1800s to do that. Now, he lived in the one on the left side, and then his uncle lived on the one on the right side. Now, I put this in because as soon as he graduated from high school, he went to Scranton, Pennsylvania, and he did what we call an apprentice or an internship with an architect named Edwin Walter, and he was only there 18 months. What I'd like to find out is, how did he get there? Why did he go to Scranton from Lancaster? What was the connection? Now, his father, Amos, was a carpenter, and he was also had planing mill experiences. So all the Urbans of that time were somehow involved in construction. So that's where he got that connection and probably connected the dots to find this career in architecture. So he stayed with Mr. Walter for about 18 months, and I put this photograph in because in the day, that's how you drew. You drew standing up, and you did not hover over boards like we do today. There's not a whole lot written about his first apprenticeship. The architect, not much known about the guy in Scranton, but what's really known is about the guy in Philadelphia. After 18 months in Scranton, he moved to Philadelphia. Again, I don't know what the connection was, probably some connection his father had in the carpentry and planing mill industry, but he went to work for this architect named Willis Gaylord Hale, a nutcase. Google it. Google this guy. He was way off the reservation, very controversial architect in the city of Philadelphia. So C. Emlen Urban worked with him from 1882 to 1885 in Center City, Philadelphia. So Mr. Hale did his own buildings. So he did buildings for clients, and then this is a building he designed for himself, the Willis G. Hale office building. And in the newspapers at the time, they described it this way: perhaps the most bizarre-looking skyscraper of the 19th century, an architectural aberration. He was like this potpourri. He would just mix and match styles. He would pick from this style and throw it into that one, and he would create these bizarre details, and it was just like the guy was way out in left field. But this is where C. Emlen Urban worked for several years. So the work we see in Lancaster was clearly influenced by his years working in Philadelphia. And this is one of Mr. Hale's buildings, the Morris Fleischer Residence, 1880. You can see how crazy that must have looked at that period of time. Basically taking a grid, a pattern, and layering it over the facade of a building and creating this kind of egg crate appearance. Imagine how upset the neighbors were. Its guy was really way out there. Now, he also, a lot of the times, the architects of that period would get into residential architecture. And this is a good example of Mr. Hale's work. Again, mix and matching Dutch influences with Queen Anne, with Victorian, all kinds of detailing that he was going on. Does anyone recognize this building? Look familiar to you? Jody, it's in your town. I'll put it in color because it's there today. It's the Mary Dixon Memorial Chapel, Linden Hall, Lidditz. Now, the interesting thing, you look at the date and you go into the records, 1885, Urban was working for Gaylord Hale and also doing this through Gaylord's office. So you can see that he may have been instrumental in Mr. Hale getting and winning this commission because of his connection here to Lancaster County. There were several buildings that Gaylord Hale did in our region while Urban was working for him in Philadelphia. Interesting connection. So in 1886, he wrapped up his internship with Mr. Hale, said, "Thank you very much, I've learned a lot. Now I'm going to move back to my hometown of Lancaster and start my own career." So in 1886, he moved back to Lancaster and he started his career in the Woolworth Building, which was on the first block of North Queen Street. It's no longer there, unfortunately, but his office was in this building. We don't know exactly where. That's a piece of research I would love to do to find out where in this building he set up his practice, because at that period of time in 1886, this is what an architect's office looked like. You hear drawing board, literally boards. They were boards on wooden trestles, and you would basically depend a lot on natural light to provide the lighting while you were doing your drawings in pen and ink on linen. Our drawing boards at that time had weights, counterweights, balances. You could adjust them for standing, stooping, whatever, as long as you got your work done. Now, the first thing you do as in an architect's office, and we all do it, not today anymore, everyone uses computers, but back when I was in school, the first thing you do is you learn the alphabet. Not ABC, but you learn how to print the alphabet. And it was absolutely imperative that an architect and anyone working in an architect's office learn how to print like what? An architect. How many times do people say, "Oh, you print like an architect"? Well, thank you. The reason architects printing looks this way, and the reason every intern working in any office has to print this way, is because one drawing is not done by one person. It's done by 3, 4, 5, 6 people over a period of time working on that same drawing. So it was imperative that the printing always looked like it was done by one person. That's why we have architects printing. Fascinating. And so at the end of the day, when drawings get moved around the office, you can't tell if it's Tom's printing or Gregg's printing or Jody's printing. It doesn't matter. It all has to be the same. Now, this is the interesting part. I always want to know, how does a person grow their practice? Well, you can see the affiliations that C. Emlen Urban quickly got involved in. This is the list, and there you can see Rotary, second from the bottom, in our community. He was very active in the business and social aspects and fabric of our local community. And so it was not too long before he started generating relationships with these people. And these relationships then led to architectural commissions. So these names probably look very familiar to you on the screen. The interesting thing is, okay, where did he get his first break? Every architect is looking for the break. And his first break, we'll call it the first commission, was his southern market. So his shingles only been in the flapping in the wind for about 24 months. And he was commissioned to design one of the preeminent buildings in our city, the Southern Market. Now, how did he do that? How did he win that commission? His father was on the board of the Southern Market. Not bad, Dad. So here he is, this young kid. What is he? 25 years old. 25 years old. And what I find also interesting, you have an architect talking about an architect, which doesn't happen very often in nice ways. I love this guy. He's a genius. 25 years old, he has the courage to do this, to start an amazing commission in our city with his connections through his father's influence. However, there was one condition. The board of directors said to Urban and his father, "We'll award you this commission to build this brand new, we'll call it greenfield building at Vine and Queen. But first, because you're so young, we want you to go to York, Pennsylvania, and visit their new farmers market." So C. Emlen Urban was directed with the board. They all went to York to visit the Central Market House there. And that was also designed in 1888, just finished. They wanted to go see the new building, so there it is. And then in this particular building was done in a Romanesque Revival style, but the directive was check it out, make sure that it's as grand and beautiful as the one in York. So we come back to Lancaster. I flipped the slide around, but you see the similarities? Double towers, strong centerpiece. So it's clearly influenced by the York market for here in Lancaster. Now he switched from Roman Revival to Queen Anne and did, at the age of 25, some amazing detailing. And when you look at the work that was done during his apprenticeship in Philadelphia, a lot of the same detailing and the corbelling is seen in Gaylord Hale's work as well. But you go around the Southern Market, and this is where it starts to really come alive. His ability to do correct detailing, proportions, is exquisite at that young age of 25. What I'm fascinated by is his ability to blend aesthetics with function. What you're looking at on that tower is, of course, a tower piece, but you're also looking at a piece of utility. That's also a ventilation louver that's beautifully integrated into the architecture of the roof. It just makes that tower extra special. So at that young age, he's thinking in both directions, aesthetics and functionality. He's got the oculus windows, perfect detailing. The number of soldier or brick courses around there is perfect. The real difference, the real magic, the real genius that he brought to the Southern Market, again at the age of 25, is he decided to use, and at the time it was rare, he used what we call a bowstring truss. It looks like the bow that you would shoot arrows with. It's called a bowstring truss. And the York market did not use that. It used a typical A truss, a pointed truss. The bowstring truss, very graceful, and you line them up into this sequence of trusses. And the interesting thing about a bowstring truss is they work this way, which you're probably familiar with, and they're just as effective upside down. The bowstring truss, the engineering of that truss can work in either direction. So the Southern Market is graced with the bowstring truss, which is very graceful. The Lancaster newspaper in 1888, it only took 8 months to build this building. 8 months. I don't even want to tell you the budget. It was probably like $20,000. It said one of the grandest in size and appearance in the city. The architectural beauty of the building is admitted by all who have seen it. How about that kind of an accolade versus the aberration one that his boss got? Second commission, I just wish I could have been in the house that he lived in when he opened the door after coming home from work, and he said to Jenny, Jenny, I got a new job today. Oh, yeah, some guy, he makes chocolate. And he wants me to design his house. Really? What's his name? Milton Hershey? Milton Hershey got his career. He started in Lancaster on King Street, and he had this little confection business going. And he was also a member of the Hamilton Club. And so they started a relationship and a connection there. So he and his wife commissioned C. Emlen Urban in 1889 to design their house, their mansion, on South Queen Street. And there it is. Is that gorgeous or what? So now he's looking at another style. He did Queen Anne for the Southern Market. Now he's looking at shingle style for Milton Hershey's. Now the story is this may have been a house that he did radical additions. He and Milton worked together on this, but they created this beautiful residence on 222 South Queen Street. You want to see what it looks like today? Are you sure? Isn't that a shame? Unfortunately, I Googled the address, or I walked down there, and that's what I saw. His third commission, 1891. He's still a very young man. He's 28 years old. He made a connection with Charlie Wagner, who was running a cafe and a hotel right in Center City. And he was commissioned by Charlie to design on a very tight site a new building for him. And you may be familiar with this. You have to really sort of get into the alleys of Lancaster City to appreciate this gem, but it is in fact a gem. It's probably 36 feet wide. It's very narrow, But even on this little tiny building, he's bringing his ingenuity and his genius and his talent to play. He's using what is called a Byzantine column. Not only did he cut the corner off of the building, because it was a cafe and a bar and a drinking establishment, so when you came out of the bar, you had something to hold on to. It's probably what they were talking about. Can't you just hear the design meeting? Hey, Urban. Okay, so anyway, but look at the similarities between the Byzantine columns in that chapel versus what he was introducing here in Lancaster City. So we have some really interesting things going here. Again, his use of corbelling, he decided on this one, let's do Romanesque Revival. So now he's into his third commission, his third style. So you can see how he begins to ratchet these things up over a period of time. He must have been a very restless mind, always looking to kind of stretch and push. But he's doing very interesting brick detailing here with the corbelling. This very interesting pattern that you see on the bottom of the screen, that's called diapering, like a baby's diaper. And the whole concept behind diapering is to make the space between different planes interesting. If you take the diapering away, it would just be a flat brick wall. But when you do that zigzag, it gives it more animation, particularly when the sun is playing against it. But this is an interesting detail on the Charlie Wagner Cafe. He creates the illusion of a tower, right? Does it look like a tower? It's not a tower. All he did was put, I call them soda straws, on the corners that gives you, your eye goes up to the top like it's a tower, but it's a square box building. And then he puts a pyramidal roof on and you walk away thinking, oh, it's got a cool tower. It's not a tower. It's just C. Emlen Urban at work doing some really cool things. Fourth commission. This happens to be on 624 West Chestnut Street. Menno Fry retained him, and I don't know the connection. Oh yes, he was a member of the Hamilton Club too. So again, these business connections played a big role. 1894. And while we're at it, why don't we do your neighbor's house too? So we did two mansions side by side at the same time for two different owners. You know what the definition of a mansion is versus a normal house? Tom, 5,000 square feet. If you look it up, you can basically, it comes down to the square feet, not what's in it, but how big it is. So it's 5,000 square feet, then you're called a mansion. So for this design, this isn't it. This is not West Chestnut Street. Don't get excited, Gil. But this is a French influence. He's got his fourth commission, his fifth commission, and now his next style. I'm going to introduce Chateau-esque to Lancaster City, which is a popular growing style in larger metropolitan areas. Lancaster was really unique to have a style like that introduced into this, quote, farming community. But he went with Chateau-esque, which, as you can see, reminisces of the Loire Valley in France. And here are the two buildings side by side on West Chestnut Street, built at the same time for two different owners. And they are exquisite in their detailing. And you can see the similarities between the Loire Valley, the minarets, the pyramidal roofs, the conical shapes, just lots of roof energy, and that's what they were about. Isn't that amazing? You imagine how controversial this was back in that period of time, when everyone else was doing federal or Georgian, and then boom, up pops this thing. And that's the neighbor's house. And again, you can see the use of the diapering. Do you see the diapering up on that corner piece? So he's picking up some of the earlier details. Now what's fascinating is, and what I'm proud of, is a lot of his work is completely in good condition today. So the photograph on the left is a photograph of that house in the late 1800s, and of course a current one on the right. And you can see the only difference is the railing right above the porch is missing. That's it. One of the differences is it's no longer a private home. It's 4 apartments in each of those buildings. So there's 8 families living in those 2 buildings. Now here's one that has been, I would call it, radically altered. 1894, this is on North Duke Street at Lemon. And isn't that gorgeous? Do you know where that is? You're familiar with this location? You've seen this building, I'm sure. Isn't that sad? I think the Rotary should buy that, reintroduce it, and move your club down there. But that has been completely altered nevertheless, it still has good bones. There's still some of the details left in the building, and clearly the date stone indicates that it was constructed in 1894. This next one, Peter T. Watt, you've all seen this one. He's on this Chateau-esque roll. He met Peter at the Hamilton Club. He also met Peter because they lived across the street from one another. This is the house that Urban lived in at 212 East King Street. He remodeled an older building and put this facade on the front. So he and Jenny Olivia lived in this building, and right across the street from him, you can see his house is very unpretentious. But right across the street from him was Peter's house. So not only were they members of the Hamilton Club and the business community, but they were also neighbors across the street. So they must have been in conversation one day, said Peter said to Urban, I want to get out of this hot city. I want to go out in the suburbs and design a little cottage. And we'll call it Rosyln, because I'm from Scotland. And it's going to be very small, about 8,000 square feet. So there it is. How many have seen this building? What's missing today? What's missing in this photograph? I rest my case. It never had trees. They just happened. So there it is, Chateau-esque. The trees, the house is actually purchased by a New York City family, and they are going to convert it back into a residence and bring it up to today's standards on the inside. So I'm curious to see what they do with the planting plans around it. But when it did have trees, of course, this is what it looked like. And one of the magic parts of this is not just the house itself, or the mansion, but the carriage house that goes with it. And that has a very unique roof form that's called a bell roof, B-E-L-L, a very complicated, complex curves on those roof rafters to create that appearance that you see. Watt and Shand, we'll probably end with this one because it is the year 1898. He, in the conversations, now keep in mind, he just finished Peter Watt's personal residence. It must have gone well, because Peter said to his partner, James Shand, hey, Jimmy, I think our department store downtown needs a new look. And this guy named C. Emlen Urban, I think, can do the job for us. So they hired C. Emlen Urban to redesign their department store. And this is the department store that predates the one that you see today. Here it is in a Queen Anne style. 3 stories, as you can see. It was called the Watt and Shand New York store. And there in this old photograph, you can see the lasso is that store. So what they did was the brothers, Watt and Shand, not the partners, Watt and Shand, started purchasing the buildings to the right. And over time, then, they inserted the first phase of the Watt and Shand, which is about 4 or 5 phases over a number of years. So there you can see on the far left, the original Watt and Shand building. So they were still operational. Their department still operated as they built phase 1. Now, what I'd like you to do is keep your eye on that building. Remember the Atlantic City casinos where there's always a holdout? Grandma won't sell her house, right? And the whole complex is designed around the one that won't sell. We had the same thing here in downtown Lancaster. Apparently, that building and that lasso decided we ain't selling. You see how the department store has been wrapped around it? Now, this photograph in 1926, they finally got hold of it and they're tearing it down. But up until that point, they had this building right in the middle of their beautiful department store. Now, what's interesting too is Urban decided for this to introduce another French style, not Chateau-esque, but what's called Beaux-Arts. And again, it's a French-driven detailing that was introduced in this farm town of Lancaster, way out of context and comfort level for a lot of people, I'm sure. But in this 1938 photograph, you can see how it's beginning to take shape over a number of phases over time. And I want you to look at that because it's still not finished. That lasso was the last and remaining phase. I believe this may have been done shortly after his death. This photograph was taken in 1938. He died in 1939. The last phase is still not in place. That is the last phase on this photograph. To see how that has been value engineered, Tim? Do you see that? Contractors in the audience? That hurts me. But there you can see how the last phase next to the William Montgomery House has been stripped clean of some of the detailing that you see on the building. But I have always advocated to the readers, please walk, get out of your cars, walk, look up, and enjoy the magnificent architecture that we have within 1,200 feet of the monument downtown. You will not be disappointed. You will be if you hit a road sign or another pedestrian, which I've done. It's embarrassing. Also like to say that the city has great records. Our city was not burned over time, so we have great building permits. They actually have the original permit issued to C. Emlen Urban on, what is that date? May 24th, 1897. And you can see C. Emlen Urban for the building permit for the first phase of Wat and Shand. Is that cool or what? So that concludes the talk. It's 19 after. I would love to entertain questions. We'll carry on, but you have to invite me back. We got 40 years to go. Thank you.